Hello everyone, and welcome to your complete and ultimate Cyno guide. Cyno is rerunning in the second half of the current 4.2 banner, so this video is to hopefully guide any current or future Cyno owners on how to roughly build and play him. I'll be covering all of the typical stuff as with my usual guides, all in an as condensed manner as possible, with timestamps below for you to navigate to wherever you want. Just as a heads up, most of the footage recorded is with my free-to-play account Cyno, along with his free-to-play teams. But I will also have some footage recorded on my friend's account where I can showcase more premium teammates, courtesy of Jasper. Thanks man. With all of that out of the way, let's get right into the guide. Cyno is an Aggravate-focused DPS, focused on being an on-fielder hyper-carry style character. He is completely burst dependent, relying on his normal attacks and enhanced skill, and can be played as a pure Aggravate DPS or in a hybrid Quickbloom comp. For those of you who are at lower investment levels with your Cyno build or team, I personally recommend Quickbloom over Aggravate, as Cyno's damage multipliers are extremely poor, so you'll struggle to get good damage with him if you are only using him in Aggravate. Proccing Hyperblooms can help make up for Cyno's low damage, even without high investment, but does make Cyno's team comp a little bit more restrictive. For pure Aggravate Cyno, he's just the same archetype as any other Quicken-based DPS. I'll get more into the details in the team comp section. Cyno is unfortunately a character riddled with a ton of weaknesses. His damage is very low when compared to the competition, his burst is incredibly hard to play around as he needs to remain on field, and so he cannot be played in quick swap. He also has an extremely high burst cost and relatively poor energy generation, meaning he benefits greatly from having someone like Fischl in the party. Cyno does need a lot of investment to perform well, so if you're looking for a strong DPS from a meta perspective, I would personally shy away from pulling Cyno. He's currently one of the worst C0 5-star DPSs in the game, and there are much better value DPSs to pull for. That being said, with high enough investment, he can definitely be more than enough to clear Abyss, even in free-to-play teams. Just know that you will struggle more with him than many other teams and characters in the game. Cyno's normal attack talent is pretty useless, do not bother leveling this at all. Cyno's elemental skill differs depending on whether he's in his burst or not. When outside of his burst, his skill is pretty unexceptional, dealing 1 instance of electro damage, but the multiplier is very low, so the skill is only there to generate particles, of which it generates 3 electro particles when it hits an enemy. It has a 7.5 second cooldown, so it's still not great as a particle generator, which leads to one of Cyno's major issues due to his burst cost, which I'll get to in a bit. Speaking of his burst, this is the entire core of Cyno's unfortunately bad kit, so there's quite a lot to cover. Once activated, Cyno will enter his Pack Sworn Path Clearer state, which converts his normal, charged, and plunge attacks all into electro damage that cannot be overridden. These attacks all have standard ICD, so you can proc a reaction like Aggravate once every 3 hits. During this burst, Cyno will gain an additional 100 elemental mastery, as well as gain some super armor. Admittedly, this super armor is incredibly weak, so it honestly won't stop you from getting interrupted from most attacks anyway. During this burst duration, Cyno's skill will be converted into a more powerful version that deals AoE damage and has a higher damage multiplier than his regular skill. Also, thanks to his A1, there will periodically be an eye that pops up on the screen. If you activate your skill while the eye is active, this will increase the damage of the skill and deal an additional 3 Thunderbolts that have a 100% damage multiplier each. If you use 4-piece Thundering Fury, you may have some trouble lining up your skill with the eye if you just keep casting it once it's off cooldown. I highly recommend casting 1 normal skill right before casting your burst, then casting 1 skill immediately once it's off cooldown. You'll be able to line up your 3rd skill once the first eye pops up, regardless of which set you use. If you use anything other than Thundering Fury, you should just wait until the eye pops up to cast your skill. When using a skill during its burst, it has no ICD, meaning it can proc Aggravate every time, and it only generates 1 electro particle rather than 3, but also has a much shorter cooldown at 3 seconds. For those using Thundering Fury, your combo will differ slightly due to the cooldown reduction provided by the artifact set, allowing you to weave in more skills in between. After the very first eye, I will hold off on casting your skill until the next eye pops up. Following that, you can cast your next 2 skills the moment they are off cooldown. That will allow you to weave in 1 extra skill in between, and then the next skill should line up with the 3rd eye. After your 3rd or 4th eye, you probably want to swap off Cyno to restart your rotation. The big caveat with using Thundering Fury is that you need to constantly be proccing Aggravates in order to get the cooldown reduction, which may not be possible if you play against waves of weaker mobs. This will cause you to mistime your E's and lose damage, so Thundering Fury is the highest skill ceiling to do combos with. The other sets are much easier to combo with, but don't have as high damage potential. Final things to mention, this burst lasts 18 seconds, but will end the moment you swap Cyno off. This is actually actually Cyno's biggest problem, as he's very inflexible with his playstyle, being unable to be used in quick swap comps without just wasting his entire burst window. This means that your team will often run out of buffs or elemental application long before Cyno's burst ends. I do not recommend staying on Cyno for the entire 18 seconds, as there's often little reason to keep remaining on him the entire time. And lastly, this burst has a very high energy cost of 80, which means Cyno alone is going to have a pretty hard time getting it back up without some form of energy generation in the party, be it Fischl or Favonius users. We'll get into his energy management later in the artifact section. For Cyno's passive talents, his A1 was already mentioned, but it's just his enhanced skill when you trigger it with the eye, and his A4 increases his normal attack damage, skill bolt damage, and elemental mastery during his burst duration. Pretty straightforward stuff. Cyno doesn't have great weapon options after his signature weapon, so this list is not going to be too comprehensive. His best in slot is obviously his signature weapon, the Staff of Scarlet Sands. This provides 88 crit value while providing extra damage, scaling off Cyno's elemental mastery, which he should already be needing in his build anyways. This is easily his unequivocal best weapon, no questions asked. His next best options are going to be the Primordial J-Wing Spear and the Staff of Homa. These weapons are pretty good stat sticks, though the J-Wing Spear will generally perform better since he can actually make use of the passive fully. The Staff of Homa is good as a stat stick, but its passive is a little wasted as usual. If you have either of those two weapons, then feel free to use them on Cyno. And then for his 4-star weapons, I'd just like to say that none of these are very good and will often lose out to the 3-star White Tassel. However, if you did not hold on to your White Tassels or don't have one at R5, then these 4 stars will become options that are open to you. First up, we have the Deathmatch. The Deathmatch is a decent DPS polearm on Cyno, though its passive isn't really meaningful without refinements. As this weapon is a paid option from the Battle Pass, getting it to Refinement 5 will take both time and money, which means it's quite a costly option to get to its max potential. The other Battle Pass polearm, the Ballad of the Fjords, is also a pretty good option, but is limited by the fact that you need 3 elemental types in your party. If you play a pure Aggravate Cyno, this weapon might not be viable because you probably won't have 3 different types of elements in your party, but if you play a Quickbloom comp, this weapon is actually quite good. Your last 4-star option is going to be the Missive Windspear. This was a free event weapon that is decent, but is the worst option on the list. It's also the hardest to build around because it does not have crit in its substat, so if you're F2P and don't have a White Tassel, you aren't exactly spoiled for choice. This is your only option. And then lastly, we have the 3-star White Tassel. This weapon is good on Cyno because he doesn't really need high attack, and the passive buffs his normal attack damage, which increases his burst damage by quite a lot. It offers crit rate in its substat, making it easy to build around, and at Refinement 5, this is Cyno's best free-to-play weapon, beating out every 4-star in most scenarios. The biggest con of this weapon is that it is not a gacha item and can only be obtained from certain Liyue chests, so if you didn't hold on to your White Tassels, then you're in rough luck. So yeah, Cyno isn't exactly spoiled for choice in terms of weapons. This shouldn't be surprising as DPS polearms outside of the 5-star category have pretty much always been crappy, so Cyno is no exception to that rule. I hope you guys didn't throw away all your White Tassels, lol. For Cyno's build, being a standard hypercarry, he has a pretty standard build path. Because he needs to proc Aggravates or Hyperblooms, your Sands should almost always be Elemental Mastery, your Goblet should be Electro Damage, and then your Circlet should be Crit. For your raw stats, you should focus on your Crit, your EM, and your Energy Recharge. If you use a crit weapon, you should very easily be able to achieve a 70 to 200 crit ratio. If you don't have a crit weapon, then just reduce the crit value from your crit damage. But ideally, you should always maintain at least 70 to 80% crit rate. For your Elemental Mastery, this kinda depends on whether you use Gilded Dreams or any other set. Normally, I recommend at least 200 Elemental Mastery, but if you play a Quickbloom comp, you would ideally want more, and hitting over 300 should be quite easy if you use Gilded Dreams. Energy Recharge is the most difficult stat to deal with though. Cyno's burst cost is incredibly high, and if he is the lone Electro member, you're going to need like 200% ER to get his burst up every rotation. Having Thundering Fury can reduce your ER needs by around 20 to 30% due to the cooldown reduction. As you can see with my own Cyno, my ER is actually very low. In my personal experience, if I use Fischl in the team, I can usually get my burst up a little after I restart my rotation. However, once I remove Fischl, I absolutely struggle with getting my burst back up, even with a Favonius user in the party. So, if you do not play Cyno with Fischl, I highly recommend building at least 130 to 140% ER if possible. If you have Favonius users or use Fischl, then having less ER, it becomes slightly more viable. Cyno only has a few good artifact sets to cover due to his playstyle, so this should be quite straightforward. Cyno's best artifact set is generally going to be the 4-piece Thundering Fury. While it doesn't give him the highest damage per hit, it allows you to cast more skills and in turn provides more energy for the burst uptime. These are important as they are all indirect DPS increases. As mentioned in the talent section, this does have a different combo that is harder to utilize if you want to time it with your eye, but if you can get used to the combo, this is the best general option. The only problem is that this set is very inefficient to farm or strongbox for, as not many other characters use Thundering Fury. Alternatively, a much better set to farm for would be the 4-piece Gilded Dreams. This provides Cyno with better raw stats, but doesn't offer the skill cooldown reduction or extra energy that Thundering Fury provides. If you play in Quickbloom or happen to have farmed this set a lot and have a good 4-piece set, then this will be Cyno's next best option. I personally use this as I have a very good set for it. As you can see, I have over 240 crit value on it, and I just don't have a good Thundering Fury set. And lastly, for those who don't have both a good Thundering Fury or Gilded Dream set, the third best option would be the 4-piece Gladiator's Finale. This set is one that many people probably already have, so probably requires minimal farming, but it does fall behind the other options by a decent amount. These 3 sets are the only ones I recommend. 2-piece sets are very copium on Cyno, and 4-piece Thunder Soother is so inefficient to obtain that I don't expect anyone to have a good full set that is just ready on hand. For Cyno's teams, there are 2 main ways he can go, either pure Aggravate or Quickbloom. Either way, Cyno will always need one consistent Dendro applicator, with Dendro Traveler and Nahida being the obvious best ones. Nahida has very persistent Dendro application, but does come with one major flaw, being that you require her to be on field if you wish to reapply Dendro. Against bosses or single targets, this is fine, but in AoE or multi-wave scenarios, Cyno will be unable to proc his Aggravates against new enemies. Dendro Traveler is the next best option, as her burst has a pretty wide AoE and lasts decently long, but she will not provide as much damage in terms of buffs or personal DPS to Cyno. Unsurprisingly, another great option will be Baizhu. Baizhu provides off-field healing and shielding, both are things that Cyno desperately needs. However, because his Dendro application is so terrible, he will usually have to be used alongside your standard Dendro applicator anyway. But once you have your Dendro teammates, your remaining slots will depend on your playstyle. If you plan to play in Quickbloom, which as mentioned previously is better for low investment players, you're obviously going to need a Hydro character. Xingqiu will generally be the best option as he provides tiny bit more super armor and the fastest Hydro application in the game with the longest uptime. Alternatively, Furina is also a good teammate because she buffs Cyno a ton. But if you do use Furina with Cyno, you will definitely need Baizhu due to her HP drain mechanic. You also won't proc as many blooms since Furina's Hydro application is just not amazing, so you'll have to decide if that trade-off is worth it or not, especially since buffing Cyno's poor damage is not going to help that much in the grand scheme of things. But then for those of you who play pure Aggravate Cyno, you only have one option, and it's almost certainly Fischl. Fischl provides a ton more extra damage and more importantly, energy from her own particles and electro resonance, which Cyno really needs. There is no other teammate that comes even close to being as good as Fischl in the second electro slot. Your other 2 teammates can remain the same as the previous ones, with your Dendro applicators and your sustain unit. In a free-to-play team, I personally use Fischl, Dendro Traveler, and Yao Yao. While this team does struggle at times, mainly due to Cyno's own shortcomings, it is enough to clear Abyss within the recommended clear time of 90 seconds. Do keep in mind that my Fischl and Cyno are pretty well built though, and a pure Aggravate Cyno team greatly hinges on having highly invested characters. If you aren't quite at that level yet, I recommend sticking to Quickbloom because Hyperblooms can make up for Cyno's low damage without much investment needed. So yes, Cyno is quite an expensive character to play well. His free-to-play teams are riddled with problems, and he really likes having either Nahida, Baizhu, or even both at the same time, which is very restrictive. That's not to say that he cannot clear Abyss in a free-to-play team, as my free-to-play account has clearly demonstrated that it is possible. However, compared to almost every other team archetype that I play in Abyss, I do struggle with Cyno the most. In a Hyperbloom team, removing him and running a sub-DPS unit like Yelan instead has more often than not been much easier to play due to easier particle funneling and less restrictive playstyle. Cyno is a character who needs a ton of dedication to play in both himself and his team to bring out his max potential. So I think at this point, it's pretty clear that Cyno is not a very good character at C0, but he does scale pretty decently well with his constellations for those of you who have money to burn. Constellation 1. This increases Cyno's attack speed during his burst, pretty obvious stuff, but it allows you to weave in more normal attacks and thus proc more aggravates. Constellation 2 gives Cyno up to an additional 50% electro damage bonus with pretty much full uptime. Again, it's just another damage increase. Constellation 3 and 5 are burst and skill talent level increases as usual. Constellation 4. This gives Cyno the ability to provide flat energy refund to his teammates. Unfortunately, this doesn't include himself, which has always been one of his biggest problems. It's very unfortunate that this is the case since it makes this Cyno's most useless constellation. And Constellation 6. This allows Cyno's normal attacks during his burst to fire off the same lightning bolts even without using his skill. It triggers very consistently, usually more than 10 times within the 8 seconds that it is up. With a 100% damage multiplier each, this is actually a pretty sizable DPS increase. So yeah, Cyno's constellations aside from Constellation 4 are all good DPS increases. However, while they directly increase his low damage, they do not fix his biggest problems, such as his high burst costs, inflexible rotations, and lack of super armor. They do improve him, but they don't really change his playstyle or major issues in any way. They just help you clear a bit faster. Finally, onto the Abyss Showcase. I'll be using Cyno in both my free-to-play teams and premium 5-star teams on the bottom half of the current Abyss 12. Thanks everyone for watching this Cyno guide. I know I dog on Cyno a lot, but I really like this character and I'm just sad to see how bad he is. I wish everyone the best of luck pulling and building Cyno. Check out twitch.tv/DukeKC as well, where I often stream Genshin Impact. Thanks once again for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Take care.